All right, welcome back. So in this lesson, in this video, I'm going to be teaching you my workflow for Lightroom. I'm going to be showing you my individual workflow and my batch edit workflow. They're very similar. You already know that the difference between individual and batch editing is kind of local adjustments, more fine-tuning for the individual edits. So I'm going to do a batch edit first, and then I'm going to do an individual edit on this photo right afterwards. So let's get started. Okay, so this is from a shoot that I did in February for Valentine's Day. So I'm just trying to find a group of photos here. There we go. So these all more or less look the same. Now what I'm going to do here is click on this photo, and it's already been edited to look how I wanted it to look before I brought it into Photoshop. So it looks pretty good, kind of high contrast, high shadows here. It's lit very well. You can see the end of the backdrop there. Anyway, so I like this. So what I'm going to do is hit Command C, and I'm going to copy all of these different settings here, all of the settings. So copy, and I'm going to hit G to go to my grid view. I'm going to select this photo, the one that I was just working on. I'm going to go arrow over all the way here. I'm going to hit Shift and select that, and then I'm going to just hit Command V. Oop, I guess I can't do that. Well, I'm going to right click, develop settings, and paste settings. And before you know it, they all have this exact same edit. And they all, if you just quickly scroll through, they all look exactly the same. So that is a batch edit. Now I'm going to do a individual edit. Okay, so this is one of my favorite photos from that shoot. It's just really kind of caught her in the moment. She's staring right up at my beauty dish here, mounted just above my lens, and she's just killing it with this pose, I think. So I really love this photo. So let's see what we can do to make it fantastic. And I'm just going to start from the top here. So how do we like the white balance? Usually when you're shooting flash, the white balance, the auto white balance is pretty spot on. I might like this a little bit cooler, just a little bit, and you can see that that kind of changes the whites a little bit. Not that cool. 58's pretty good. I like 5800. I'm not going to touch the tint just because it's like a rabbit hole. You don't want to go down there. The exposure. I think the exposure's pretty freaking good, and you can always double check that with your histogram here. Now, if you hit J, it'll kind of, these things light up on the histogram, and it'll show you with blue, it'll show you your blacks, and I think red, it'll show you your highlights. I don't see any red, which means I didn't blow any highlights, and you can kind of tell here there's no spikes towards the end of the histogram, which there would be if there were any blown highlights. So I'm going to hit J again, and kind of disappear. So my exposure is pretty spot on. Since there are some blacks, I'm going to go up a little bit and just see how that looks. I like it better as is. Contrast. Now this could be, just for this particular shoot, I was going for something kind of glamorous and glitzy. So I think high contrast is going to play nicely with that theme. So I'm going to jack that up to, say, 25. Let's see how that goes. And then I'm going to quickly go back down to 0 just to see the difference. I actually like that. So I'm going to keep that. I think it really adds a lot of punch to the image, especially with a beauty dish. Contrast is your friend. Highlights, not going to touch. Shadows, let's just see what happens if we bring in some of this area. Kind of makes her hair look a little brown, and in person it's black, so I don't like that. I'm going to leave that alone as well. Leave the whites alone, the blacks. I'm just going to leave all this stuff alone. Normally when I'm doing a wedding, the light's not always, it's not studio lighting. So I will probably bring up the shadows most of the time in a wedding image. This is a studio image, so I usually can nail the exposure right away in camera. So I don't have much adjusting to do here. But if I wanted to just see what it looked like again, you know, it kind of brings out a little more detail in the hair, lightens this area up a little bit, which is kind of nice. I can always kind of downplay that with some more contrast. I actually kind of like that. So let's just see what it looks like again without it. I like it without it. Let's compromise. Let's do a 13 right in between. Now clarity. Clarity again here, this is a very powerful tool. I'm going to try raising it just because I think this is such a bold pose that she's doing. If you hover over and then arrow up and down, it'll change in 5 clarity increments. What are clarity units? Whatever. So I'm just going to I'm going to kind of arrow up and then down. I want to go as high as I think it can go to where it looks kind of processed, and then go down from there and back off. I don't want to do too soft just because I think this pose is so strong. So I'm going to keep it at 10. Vibrance, there's not much color here other than the background, and that's so red it hurts. Her lips are a little red. Let's see what happens if we up it just a little bit. Can barely notice it, but since you can't notice it and it does add more color, I'm going to leave it. Saturation, I don't want to play with just because there's a human involved and it's just going to jack up their skin tones. Tone curve, I'm going to leave alone. Color, I think the colors look pretty good, to be honest. I think her skin, might be kind of bouncing. We were in like an orange room or something when we shot this, so I think her skin might be picking up a little bit of the orange ricochet for whatever reason, so I'm going to decrease that orange just a little tiny bit. Split toning again, I'm going to do later with my presets here. And I'll just do it right now, actually, since we're going down the line. I really like I said earlier, blue on blue. I just think that gives it a cooler touch. It's a little too cool, though. Let's see. See what blue-orange looks like. That looks interesting, but it kind of plays with the red a little bit. What about blue and violet? That looks cool too. I think all of these are kind of taking away. I think it's just lit so perfect. I'm not even going to touch the split toning. The detail, since this is a really important image to me, it's like a portfolio image, I'm going to take down to 0 and do all my sharpening in Photoshop. Lens corrections, I usually do that, so I'll just see what that does. Just kind of bows it out here, lightens up the corners. I don't need to really, there's no orientation, there's no line, so I don't need to do the leveler tool, and these two I always ignore. So I am more or less finished with my tabs here. I would probably remove these little pimples with the spot remover tool. Can be a bit tedious, but if it's a portfolio image, your client and you are really going to appreciate it later. If you hit spacebar and you're on the Q tool or the spot removal tool, if you hit spacebar, you get the hand, and then you can kind of drag around so you can move. There's one there, very minimal. All right, now I'm going to hit enter. So when I zoom back out, those blemishes are mostly gone. Looks like there's still one right there, but then there's some freckles here. It really just depends on how crazy you want to get with it. I am going to remove this, the light beauty dish from the frame, and I'm going to do that by hitting R. And R is the crop tool. So I'm going to leave it as the original aspect ratio. If you want to unlock this, you're then free to move to different ratios if you want. A lot of you might not know, Instagram just recently changed their viewing. You can now do portraits, but the portrait orientation is 4:5. It's not 3:2. So if you do a full portrait shot on your 3:2 camera, you're going to have some cropping. So 4:5 is the correct crop for the portrait orientation for Instagram now. Just a side note. So I'm going to keep it original. I'm going to drag this down here, get a crop. Now, your rule of thirds, if you know about that, this third point thing here is meeting directly onto her eye, and I love that. I'm actually going to be crazy and get it even more perfect so that it's hitting that, that beauty dish reflection there. That that highlight, that catch light. Thank you. So now it's perfectly cropped. I really like the negative space over here, and I think her skin and everything looks just so beautiful. The spot removal tool helped me get rid of some of those blemishes. I could do a little bit of softening if I wanted to, by lowering the clarity and doing a local adjustment brush. So I'm going to actually do -25, and I can kind of go in there and make the brush a little bit bigger, go in on her cheeks and maybe around her mouth, and just kind of soften the area. That's what this does. So what I'll do is I'll zoom in, and then I'm going to delete this. If you hover over the gray, it'll show you exactly where you painted. But I'm going to select this, and I'm going to show you the difference. So here it is with and without. And you notice there's just some darker shadows here. It's a very subtle effect, and I only did -25. You can go down to -100, and I will, just to show you what it actually does. You'll notice that her cheek there kind of like almost is blending into the rest of her skin. So it's really powerful tool, clarity. So other than that, I think it's almost a perfect image. Again, this is all personal preference. So you can go in here and kind of increase the exposure, since we did up the contrast a little bit. That kind of looks cool, but I like a darker image. That's just always been my style. So that is my complete workflow for Lightroom editing, and that's for an individual edit. You saw the batch edit earlier. I did that really quickly. Presets do definitely come into play here when I'm individual editing. I always leave this open. These are just like the general portrait presets from SLR Lounge. They're part of that package that I got for 150 bucks. I have these kind of quick settings here, the soften and the harden, and it's more or less upping and downing the contrast, the clarity. I have sharpen. Noise reduction I do have, just in case I have a really dark image and I jack up the exposure. It's going to really show a lot of noise, so I have that at the ready. My split toning settings here. And I usually do some sort of radial vignette, just because I just like dark corners. That's just always something I've kind of gravitated towards. Yeah, but other than that, I mean, we have my user settings here. These are, I actually have like a studio setting here and for objects and then for people. So if I did flash color soft, that's kind of my default setting for the studio. Now in this case, like I mentioned earlier, I wanted it to be more of like a bolder look. So I'm not going to have as much softness as part of the settings of the photo. So I'm going to back off on that, and you'll notice it gets bolder. Like more of her details are showing, the wrinkles under her eyes. You can kind of see them, and that's not necessarily a traditional thing when you're dealing with beauty photography. You don't want to see any flaws whatsoever. But for me personally, I like to see a little bit of grit, just a little tiny bit. It shows that we're still human in a way. So that's it for my Lightroom editing workflow. I hope you got a lot out of it. I know I went quickly. There's a lot of information, so you should probably rewind, watch it a couple times, and maybe practice with your own files and stuff. But I hope you learned a lot from that. Next up, I'm going to explain Photoshop. I'm going to kind of go over the interface and the tools, and then I'll do another demonstration like this where I show you my actual full workflow, the actions that I use, and any shortcuts and tips and tricks. And then at the end of that, I'm going to show you something really cool. I'll show you some bonus little effects that you can do in Photoshop that are actually pretty easy, but not a lot of people know how to do, and they can really add some punch to your photos. So I'll see you in the next video.